President Trump gave us one mission: make America safe again. And we will not sit idly by and let these drug dealers continue to do business, run roughshod on our neighborhood.
More than 4.3 tons of narcotics, more than $138 million in illegal proceeds, and 102 people taken into custody, including an airport director, 9 corrupted officials, and dozens of embedded insiders. None of this happened along the Mexico border. It did not unfold in dark alleyways. It was not hidden in remote desert areas. It existed inside one of the most important airports in the state of Michigan, in the center of the United States. At 4:58 in the morning on November 19, 2025, while most of Detroit was still in darkness before sunrise, a federal team from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security moved quietly into the administrative wing of Detroit Metropolitan Airport. There were no sirens and no loud police caravans. The public received no warning, only unmarked vehicles, silent movements, and one target. It was the private office of the airport director. For many years, Detroit Metropolitan Airport was not only an airport, it was a vital link of the Great Lakes region, an international gateway for Michigan, and a place that connected millions of passengers and shipments with the rest of the United States and the world. Tens of thousands of jobs depended on it. Billions of dollars in commercial value passed through it each year. A city could collapse if this airport stopped operating. Inside a place seen as a symbol of capability and pride for Michigan, a parallel system had been quietly built over many years. This system did not serve commerce, passengers, or national security. It served one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the Western Hemisphere. It served the group known as Cartel Jalisco New Generation, also called CJNG. It began with a few irregular entries in transport data. Cargo logged near midnight, weight declarations that did not match the goods, consulting invoices tied to no real service. Each detail alone could be blamed on human mistakes or system errors. But as federal agencies compared the data over many months, a different pattern formed. The system was not failing. The system was being used. According to federal investigators, the person with the authority to legitimize every irregularity was Evelyn Markham, the 46-year-old chief executive of Detroit Metropolitan Airport. When agents opened her office that morning, they did not see panic. There were no destroyed files, no damaged computers, and no signs of a rushed escape. The room remained organized and calm. The desk was neat, as if its owner had stepped away only briefly. What they discovered next removed all remaining doubts. 3 encrypted hard drives were hidden inside a secret compartment under her desk. Next to them was more than $72 million in cash, wrapped in organized bundles. Inside a concealed wall chamber, agents recovered dozens of access badges for restricted zones of the airport. These badges were meant for high-level personnel or specialized technical crews. Several of the listed individuals did not exist in the airport's official records. According to prosecutors, several names were linked directly to CJNG. This was no longer a routine corruption case. It was a deliberate structure. Over 4 years or so, Markham allegedly used her authority to turn the airport's operating mechanisms into a complete pipeline for the cartel. Federal audit documents later reported that she personally approved 46 late-night cargo flights. They followed the same pattern: altered flight numbers, vague declarations, and total weights that made no sense for the listed goods. In a normal setting, such flights would be flagged immediately. Here, the final approving official was Markham. Alongside that, she placed 18 individuals connected to the cartel into key airport positions. They worked in baggage handling, runway coordination, special cargo zones, and the night shift supervision of third-party contractors. Some used false identities. Others were legitimized with subcontract agreements approved by Markham. Through this embedded network, every shipment could move without real oversight. Cargo went from aircraft to restricted storage zones, then directly onto trucks registered to shell companies in Detroit, Ann Arbor, Flint, and Grand Rapids. On paper, these companies operated as aviation consulting and logistics firms. In reality, they formed a transport chain moving narcotics out of the airport. According to later tracing results, these routes carried nearly 3 tons of methamphetamine, more than 1.4 tons of cocaine, and hundreds of thousands of fentanyl pills into the interior of the country. More than $127 million was laundered through consulting invoices and fabricated nonprofit organizations. These groups had no real employees and no real activities, yet appeared complete in legal filings. Inside the world of CJNG, Detroit Metropolitan Airport no longer carried its familiar name. They called it La Puerta del Norte, the Northern Gate. The person standing at that gate was not a street-level trafficker. It was not a hidden gunman. It was an airport director, someone who represented order, rules, and aviation security in the United States. According to investigators, the most unsettling detail was not only the structure itself, it was the person Markham allegedly brought into it. Her son, Adrian Markham, 19 years old, was placed on the Night Logistics Coordination Team, a zone with very limited access. Under his mother's direction, Adrian supervised pallet movement, coordinated with embedded personnel, and sent signals to drivers outside the airport perimeter. Recovered security camera footage showed that he was not an observer. He was part of the system. On the outside, Evelyn Markham continued to appear at ribbon cuttings. She spoke about modernizing the airport, improving safety, and raising international standards. But behind the door of her office, she was no longer a manager. She was an architect, someone who turned one of America's most important infrastructure sites into a strategic transport route for a transnational criminal organization. As federal agencies began to understand the full scale of what she had built, they realized the problem no longer belonged to a single airport, a single city, or even a single state. Michigan had not only been infiltrated, it had been redesigned, piece by piece and layer by layer, to serve an underground empire that few people had ever seen with their own eyes. What was about to be uncovered next would force the entire United States to reassess its own system in a completely different way. As the picture of Evelyn Markham's network came into focus, federal officials understood they were not dealing with a routine corruption case or an isolated smuggling route. What was unfolding at Detroit Metropolitan Airport was a systemic and organized infiltration that had rooted itself inside the operational structure of a critical state facility. That meant one thing: if they acted too slowly, the network would not collapse, it would expand. A temporary command center was established beneath the regional office of the Department of Homeland Security in Detroit. Satellite maps, transport routes, vehicle location data, and hundreds of connection charts covered the walls. Lines linked individuals, businesses, flight logs, and storage hubs. The cold blue glow of the screens reflected on the tense faces of investigators who understood they were monitoring more than cartel activity. They were watching a sign of infiltration that could spread across the Midwest. When all the data was layered together, one conclusion became unavoidable. Michigan had been compromised at a strategic level. The familiar El Paso to Texas to Chicago route, used by narcotics enforcement, was now secondary. The Detroit to Ann Arbor to Grand Rapids to the northern Canadian border route had become the lifeline that CJNG was quietly building. The frightening part was not the volume of goods that had passed through. It was the perfection of the system designed to move them. In that moment, the acting regional director of DHS, Michael Rohr, stepped forward. His voice was low, clear, and firm. He did not call this a standard enforcement operation. He called it a reclaiming of territory that had been infiltrated from within. A cartel had exploited the airport, its personnel, and the gaps in Michigan's oversight mechanisms. That night, the mission was not only to seize shipments or arrest intermediaries. The goal was to take back control of Michigan's own system. The operation was named Operation Wolverine Shield, a symbol of strength and defense for the state of Michigan. The plan was built on one principle: the strike had to be simultaneous, precise, and absolute. Any delay or leak of information could allow the underground network to rebuild, hide evidence, and reposition itself. At 2:14 in the morning, while Detroit remained asleep, the order was issued. From staging points in Detroit, Dearborn, Lansing, and Grand Rapids, nearly 840 federal agents began to move. There were no marked police cars and no loud escorts. Unmarked SUVs slid through the darkness like shadows. DHS armored vehicles split into separate formations, heading toward targets identified over many months. Above them, helicopters lifted off from Selfridge. Their rotor blades cut through the freezing Michigan air as they followed preloaded routes. On the ground, strike teams were already in position. The first target was identified inside the River Rouge industrial zone of Detroit. It was a warehouse registered as an aircraft parts recycling facility. On paper, it was a legitimate business. To federal investigators, it was one of the key transfer points built into Markham's system. The reinforced steel doors were not meant to stop petty thieves. They were meant to stop any eyes from seeing inside. As federal units approached, every action followed procedures drilled dozens of times. Entry equipment activated in seconds. A breach was opened. Inside were not scrapped parts or broken machinery. The room was filled with tightly wrapped cargo units stacked neatly on transport pallets, built to airport standards. Everything was organized like a legitimate logistics line, except the contents did not belong to the lawful economy. In Flint, a second target had prepared for confrontation. An old airplane hangar, renovated into a so-called technical maintenance zone, had several exits welded shut, turning it into a makeshift defensive structure. When federal forces approached, the communication grid in the area briefly went dark. Ew. It was a temporary signal disruption created by a remotely operated device. This was not a spontaneous act. It showed the cartel had anticipated detection and prepared technological countermeasures. That advantage lasted only moments. FBI technicians quickly neutralized the disruption, clearing the way for armored vehicles to reach the entrance and break through the main door. Inside, hundreds of large bags were stacked in long rows. Many crates carried false labels, claiming they contained aircraft components. Their structure, size, and packaging revealed they had been moved under international aviation standards, another sign of the system's high level of professionalism. But the most intense pursuit unfolded on the open road in Grand Rapids. There, a convoy of 3 trucks tied directly to Markham's system attempted to leave the area as soon as federal activity was detected within a few miles. Helicopters tracked their movement from above. On the ground, patrol units blocked escape routes, forcing the vehicles to slow and stop. There was no high-speed highway chase like in the movies, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. Any reckless move could have created unpredictable consequences in nearby neighborhoods. In the end, the drivers were forced to step out, and were restrained without any uncontrolled escalation. As the first light of sunrise reached the edge of the city, 32 targets across the state of Michigan had been secured. 67 individuals tied to the CJNG network were taken into custody, along with 9 local officials accused of enabling or ignoring the operation. Several airport employees were also detained for expanded questioning. At another warehouse in Detroit, federal teams entered and found Adrian Markham attempting to erase data from an internal server. The attempt was desperate and filled with panic, as if he understood that if only a few files were recovered, everything he had done in the shadows would surface under the law. That night, Michigan did not simply witness an enforcement operation. The state experienced a quiet but profound cleansing. It was a confrontation between a system built on law and a parallel system designed through greed, power, and betrayal. When the sound of helicopter engines faded beyond the horizon and tactical teams withdrew from the sites, the landscape returned to the cold stillness of a normal Michigan morning. Yet elsewhere, the real battle had just begun. Not on highways, not in industrial zones, but deep inside a secured FBI facility in downtown Detroit, where everything seized during Operation Wolverine Shield was gathered to reveal each layer of truth. Dozens of hard drives, encrypted phones, laptops, and servers from warehouses and satellite offices were arranged in rows on steel tables. Devices meant to hide, erase, and mislead now sat silent under the white lights of the forensic room, waiting to be decoded. Federal cybersecurity experts, financial investigators, and data analysts worked continuously for hours, peeling away the outer shell of a network built so no one could see inside. What surprised them was not chaos, it was precision. The data did not appear as scattered fragments. It formed a prearranged map, a complete structure with routes, branches, rules, and hierarchy. The first breakthrough did not come from a large hard drive or a central server. It came from a thin storage device, nearly overlooked, hidden behind a filing cabinet inside Evelyn Markham's office. When the first layer of encryption was broken, the screen revealed a diagram of 6 corridors, marked in different colors. Each route stretched from Detroit Metropolitan Airport, passed through transfer points in Michigan, then crossed the northern border toward major urban centers in Canada, such as Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa. This was no longer a domestic network. Under Markham's direction, Detroit had become a launching point for CJNG's expansion into international markets. Experts immediately compared these routes with GPS data from seized vehicles, flight schedules, and traffic camera logs spanning several years. A disturbing truth emerged. Everything matched. The system did not operate randomly. It functioned like a multinational corporation, with planning, strategy, forecasting, and expansion capability. Alongside the route map, financial invoices decoded from accounts labeled as aviation consulting began revealing their true purpose. On the surface, each payment was listed as safety inspection fees, logistics optimization costs, or internal training expenses. But as analysts followed the flow of money, they uncovered more than $127 million transferred through 5 maintenance contractors and a series of non-profit organizations with no employees, no activity, and no real community impact. A separate file, encrypted more heavily than the others, contained a list of 19 so-called charitable donations. On paper, these were funds meant for community development and social support. When the destinations were identified, all of them led to accounts controlled by CJNG in Guadalajara, Mexico. What appeared to be goodwill was actually a financial branch of a transnational laundering operation. However, the transport map and financial structure were not the most unsettling discoveries. Inside the deepest directory, labeled coldly as Nexus, investigators found detailed profiles of 48 personnel currently or formerly working at Detroit Metropolitan Airport. Each profile included photos, job titles, employment timelines, access levels, personal habits, and most importantly, exploitable vulnerabilities. One was a baggage handler facing large medical debt after a family surgery. Another was a night security employee threatened through a younger brother involved in an illegal debt. A runway coordinator had been promised enough money for a down payment on a house if he turned a blind eye during certain hours. And some had crossed the line long ago, becoming active contributors rather than manipulated pieces. Next to the Nexus folder was a chain of email exchanges between Evelyn Markham and an individual identified only by the codename Elvia Hero, the person overseeing CJNG logistics in North America. The messages showed that Markham was not a victim under pressure and not someone who made a brief mistake. She was an active partner, negotiating schedules, complaining about delays, and even threatening to remove certain local officials if they demanded a larger share. Her tone in those exchanges was not the tone of fear, it was the tone of someone who believed she could not be replaced. But the clearest proof of Evelyn Markham's level of control appeared inside the airport's internal camera system. Data recovery specialists found numerous signal gaps that aligned perfectly with the moments when CJNG-related shipments landed. Each gap was covered by a false maintenance report signed by Markham or by individuals inside her network. In one restored video, Adrian Markham appeared clearly as he guided pallets into a restricted zone while using a communication device later identified as part of the cartel's encrypted system. There was no longer suspicion and no speculation. Adrian's role was operational. For investigators, the picture was now complete. Evelyn Markham did not simply help CJNG move shipments. She helped build a human infrastructure inside a physical infrastructure. Every embedded employee was a control valve. Every signal gap was a layer of cover, and every approval she signed was a moving part inside this massive smuggling machine. Michigan had not only been used as a transit route, the state had been integrated into a transnational network with the precision of a multinational corporation and the cold efficiency of a borderless criminal organization. When the final streams of data were decoded, analysts understood something even more alarming. The map in front of them did not show only the past of this network. It was the blueprint for how CJNG planned to expand into other states if the system had not been stopped in time. The battle on Michigan's streets had ended, but inside the world of data and policy, it had only begun. Once the last hard drive was decoded and the final warehouse was sealed, federal agencies were able to assemble the full picture of the network Evelyn Markham had built. This time, the numbers were not estimates or speculation. They were the official findings of one of the largest operations ever conducted in Michigan. A total of 102 individuals were taken into custody across the state. 67 were confirmed to have direct ties to CJNG. 9 local officials were indicted for enabling or ignoring illicit activity. 48 airport employees were suspended or terminated for deeper review. The seized material exceeded 4.3 tons of narcotics, including methamphetamine, cocaine, and synthetic derivatives linked to fentanyl. More than $138 million in assets tied to laundering activity was frozen in Michigan, Illinois, and southern Ontario. But investigators understood that the real meaning of this case was not in the quantity seized. It was in how the operation had functioned. Detroit Metropolitan Airport had been transformed into a complete logistics hub for a transnational criminal organization, operating under the legal appearance of a critical civilian infrastructure. That meant if such a system could exist in Michigan for many years without detection, then in theory, it could exist elsewhere. Documents recovered during Operation Wolverine Shield showed that CJNG had planned to replicate this model at airports in Ohio, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, places identified as having looser oversight and heavier reliance on private contractors for infrastructure operations. This discovery led the Department of Homeland Security to issue an emergency nationwide directive requiring a full review of access procedures for restricted zones at major airports, along with the broadest internal security audit since the events of September 11th. On the legal front, Evelyn Markham now faced multiple federal charges. They included conspiring with a transnational criminal organization, participating in large-scale narcotics transportation, laundering illegal proceeds, abusing public authority, manipulating and undermining aviation security, and endangering interstate and international commerce. Her son, Adrian Markham, was charged separately with assisting network operations, obstructing the investigation, and participating in unlawful cargo movement inside restricted security zones. As the information spread, the Michigan community reacted with outrage and disbelief. Residents questioned how someone leading an airport security system, a place expected to be among the most protected environments in the state, could become the central link of a criminal operation. State legislators, labor unions, and even former airport employees demanded additional independent investigations to clarify who overlooked or ignored early warning signs. But inside federal briefing rooms, a larger question remained. If Evelyn Markham could build this inside the center of the United States, under the full shield of a modern civil system, then how many other gates were being manipulated without detection? And how many individuals were quietly holding similar positions in places no one questioned? Operation Wolverine Shield succeeded in dismantling a major smuggling route, but its success also delivered a warning. In an era where real power no longer lies in weapons, but in access and system control, the threat does not always hide in darkness. Sometimes it sits inside bright offices, behind titles trusted by the public. And if the United States wants to protect itself from these new forms of danger, then perhaps it is time to revisit the most important question. Who is truly standing guard at the gates of this nation? If you want to explore how other networks have infiltrated systems across the United States, follow the next parts of this series. The story in Michigan may have ended, but other gates remain open.